Welcome back to another episode of Kassick's Corner. I don't have a cool intro yet, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. And if you're brand new, thank you so much for tuning in because I am so prepared today. It's crazy. You guys will not believe it. I actually have like notes typed out for what I like want to talk about today. So that's super cool. It's already happening. I don't have an intro, but at least I have an idea about what I want to talk about. Um, Before I get into that, however, one is I'm trying to like say a lot less because when I go back and edit these videos for TikTok, I realize that I say it like every goddamn other second. So I'm gonna just try to like see. I was gonna say it right there, and then I decided that I wasn't gonna. So we're gonna move past that, and we're gonna go into what I was gonna say. What I was gonna say is I took like a week off, like kind of accidentally last week, and I didn't post anything. So this is episode 8 coming out like a week after I wanted it to, just because of the fact that like I don't know, doing all of these different things all at once gets really like exhausting and it gets really like it takes a lot of time. And then like I'm also teaching full time and I'm also like coaching speech and debate still. And last weekend on Saturday we had a tournament. I didn't get home until like I think 11:30 that night and it was fine. Like I wasn't super exhausted, but like then Sunday to like do grad school and then to do like the other obligations that I have, like just as a person, just like relaxing and chilling. Like I don't know, I have a lot of creative outlets, and to find time to do them all is just kind of like it's kind of a lot sometimes. And I really find value in those things. But anyway, I took a week off, and I'm recording this right after class, and I've always wanted to like get in this kind of routine of like recording immediately after class because I was like my ring light's already on, like I already got the microphone, I already got my computer all set up, so it's like why not do that? And this is the first day where I like kind of emotionally and mentally prepared for that, and it's the first night that I feel like I actually have the capacity to do it after an hour and a half long grad school class that's on Zoom, and it's it just is what it is. So I'm recording this that night to continue to kind of like keep the plan going forward, and then I'm hoping to have another episode like get in the right, getting in the swing of things a little bit more. So all that said, like thanks so much for listening to that like 2 minute rant because not that I have a bunch of people just like waiting for this next episode to pop out, but also like I feel bad because the one thing that like you learn about creating content is like it's all about consistency, and in a job and a lifestyle that is just like totally not used to being super consistent, I find it hard to like find that consistency sometimes. So if you're still sticking around, thanks so much. I really appreciate you. We're gonna get into some teaching stuff here in a second. And the one thing that this actually came up on Saturday. I think it was Saturday because I was thinking about like what to write about, and I was driving home, and a song came on that like instantly brought me back to like this exact moment, this exact place. It's not like the So Long London situation that I did a few weeks ago. I don't even know anymore. Where I'm gonna like rant about a song the whole time, but what I am gonna do is instead of ranting about like one thing, I'm gonna start telling like stories from my classroom. So let me give you the reason as to like why this is the thing. It's because when I started this like journey, right? Like this content like creation kind of like journey when I started like thinking about what was next for me after I like left my last job. I really had wanted to publish a book. I've always been a writer, like I've talked about it for a long time. I have a blog that doesn't even get worked on anymore. I don't even know if it's around. I've started a few blogs. Y'all know I wrote a book. If you haven't bought it yet, go and buy it. It's pretty good. I would give it 5 out of 5 stars. Just like you should rate this podcast, by the way. Just throwing that out there. I don't know, just throwing that out there. Um, so writing has always been like the thing that has always been the thing that I wanted to do if I wasn't going to be a teacher. Uh, on top of like, being a chef, but that's like a whole other different journey and lifestyle for me. If I wasn't a teacher, I wanted to be a writer. And I've had lots of different ideas over the years of like what does a teaching blog look like? What does a teaching novel look like? And you check them all out and you do all these different things and you read through them and you're like, okay, well, I don't want to write like about lesson plans. I don't want to write about like research. Like that's never been my energy. I want to write about like what it's like being a teacher. I want to shed light on like the tribulations, the trials and tribulations. I want to set light on like those little moments of pure joy that are so inexplicable in teaching that only if you're in it you'll be able to understand. And I want to shed light on like those emails that we get that just fucking like destroy our days, right? I want to shed light on those little notes that we get in our mailboxes I want to shed light on like the little drawings that we get from kids or just those little like compliments and, parent teacher conferences and like all these little like tiny things that help create the experience. And I don't think there's a teaching book out there that goes through all of those things in a way that allows us to really understand or experience them in the way that they need to. And you can't really experience those things unless you're in it, right? And that's what I've always wanted to do with all my teaching stuff. So, anyway, a handful of years ago, I had this idea that I would start telling the stories of the things that happen in my classroom. I would start telling the stories of those little moments that kind of happen. And I thought of a title a while ago. I don't know if I'm going to end up using this one, but Hallway Conversations is kind of this idea that I had because I have, throughout my time as a teacher, those moments, right, where you're literally sitting on the floor of a hallway with another student have really kind of like defined who I am and what I represent as a teacher. And I can have like a whole class going on behind me, but the fact that I can talk to a student and then say, sorry, my mic was, I think I just muted myself accidentally. Hopefully the sound is okay. I'm not going to record this. I just noticed there was a weird light on my mic, so hopefully it sounds okay. If not, please deal with it because I can't record another episode tonight. Um, but it's in those little hallway conversations, right, where I can have like a whole class going on behind me. I can look at a kid and say, "Hey, like, do you need to talk about something? Like, what's going on?" And then we go and sit in the hallway and we talk for 5, 10, 30 minutes about whatever needs to be said, right? And it's in those moments that teaching kind of doesn't really get recognized, right? Like we know about the standards, we know about the standardized tests, we know about the, you know, indoctrination or whatever that teachers are supposedly doing when we can't indoctrinate them to bring a pencil. How are we going to indoctrinate them to believe a certain way? Don't even get me started on that. That's like a whole ass other episode that who knows if it will ever be published. But here we go. But it's in those like little moments where you're sitting in the hallway with a kid talking about whatever needs to be talked about that is really what the core of teaching is about. And it's those little conversations, whether it's in the hallway or in the classroom or a quick check-in that I've mentioned before. It's in those little things that I want to accentuate a little bit more. I think one of my first blogs that I started in college in my undergrad was accentuating the positive, and it was all about these like really positive moments because it was during student teaching and they kind of prepared us during student teaching to, you know, be ready to suffer basically because it's just like a really hard time. So I wanted to start a blog. So every day, every week, I think it turned out to be after student teaching, I would publish in that. And it really got me thinking about like, okay, what does this journey actually look like for me? So over the past like 4 or 5 years, I've been collating like just a bunch of different stories, frustrations, admirations, all these different TION words that, I've apparently locked into there with the parallelism. But the idea is I really wanted to like share the stories, right? And I don't remember them word for word, but I remember a lot of like their essence. And what I've done is at this point, I think I have like 400 pages of from years 1 through 8, probably, and including student teaching. So, student teaching, I count as like a year of experience because that's what it is. So, been teaching for 9 years. This is my ninth official year, but like my 10th year being experience with it, right? So from student teaching all the way to my last year at my previous school is just a collection of stories that kind of follow me and my journey with all of these different students kind of going on. And in the book, I like give names to these students. Obviously, they're fake names that kind of represent their journey and their, story and all these different things, and it kind of spells them out like in year 1 when I like meet a kid, and it kind of goes and it expands into like year 8 when I see them at a King Supers, right? And it's just the idea of it's those little moments in teaching that really, really get you there, right? And that's what we all teach for. I talked about it with my burnout episode where we were talking about like, yeah, you're doing it for the kids, right? And that's what this book is kind of about, but it surrounds like the teacher and it really captures the experience of what it's like to be a teacher through these little stories, these little vignettes, these little moments that really spell out the ins and outs of being a teacher. And this is not an ad, by the way. Like that book it's not published, it's not out there yet at all, and that's kind of like what this forum is about, right? Is about getting that conversation started. So to go back to where I initially started, is the idea for this episode of this podcast is I was listening to a song on the way home, and it was a song. It's called "Happiness" by Need to Breathe, and it immediately brought me back to this moment with a student that I look at like entirely differently now, right? Like it's this one moment, this one thing that's attached to these stories that I have written about these students. And I can't ever listen to these songs without, thinking of these students. So that's what this episode is about. It's literally things that remind me of students and their stories that literally can never leave my brain. Like I thought of, I think 15 or 20 on this list. I don't know. I'm just like scanning right now. And every time one of these things come up, I think about a very specific student. I think about a very specific moment in my teaching career. And this is just some time to talk about those stories, those student stories. So here we go. First one, like I said, is like basically any Need to Breathe song. Specifically, there's a song called Happiness, there's a song called Wasteland, and then there's a song called Testify by them. And they're mostly like a Christian, like kind of rock band, but the student kind of, exposed them to me when I was working with him. And it was always like after school, it was after soccer practice. He had an older sibling that not worked for, that played for the high school volleyball team, so their times were a little bit off. So he would always like stick around my room after practice while I was like working on stuff, while I was, cleaning up after soccer. He's like, "Oh, can I just like hang out here? I don't want to go like be bored down there." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, that's fine. Like you can hang out. It's fine. It's whatever." And in those moments, you talk about stuff, you like get into conversations, you like help with homework. It's like all of these different things all at once. And she showed me this music one time, and it was just these songs. He's like, "Oh yeah, this is like my favorite song in the world. Like it always makes me cry. Like it's this one song that like always brings me to a good place." And that song was Wasteland by Need to Breathe. And I remember we had like a really rough soccer championship that year. Like infamously bad. If you know, you know. I'm not going to go into that so much, but it was just a really rough game overall. Like red cards, injuries, people were getting kicked out. Like it's this whole thing that I go into in my book. So, if eventually if it gets published, like it's going to be there. It's going to be a little bit of a moment because for me, I think that was my third year, second year teaching. Third year. It had to be my third year. Second year. Anyway, it's fine. And he was on the soccer team at that time, and he went home and played that song in his head. And he told me like the next couple of days, he's like, "Remember that song that I like showed you?" He's like, "I played that the entire bus ride home after our soccer game." And I was like, damn, like I wouldn't have even known that that meant anything if he hadn't like showed it to me before, right? So it's just every time I think of anytime that song comes on, because it's like on my shuffle on my Apple Music now, and every time it comes on, it's like immediately thinking of that kid, immediately thinking about that hard journey in soccer, immediately thinking about those like moments after school where we would just be like cleaning up or you know drawing on the whiteboard or doing homework. Like it's those moments that like immediately take me back to that kid and that moment. The next one is literally the restaurant In and Out. So, again, if you know, you know. If you're listening to this and you know about the In and Out shenanigans, then I don't really have to explain this at all. But for those of you that aren't in the know, In and Out is a restaurant that was like, if you don't know, I don't know why I'm explaining In and Out. Y'all know what In and Out is, okay? It's a fast food restaurant that has really good burgers, and I'm obsessed with it. So when they had one in our area for our speech and debate team, it was kind of out of the way. It was like 45 minutes like from where we were at our school. And every time we would go to a tournament on the way back, we would stop at In and Out. So In and Out's, famously open like pretty late, probably like till 2 a.m. or something like that. I don't know the actual one. Like, don't come for me, okay? Like, I don't know when In and Out closes. Sorry, I don't have it memorized. Um, we would always like go to tournaments, and it'd be like a Friday night. It'd be right after school, like super long ass days, like where we would spend all day, working at the school doing our jobs, and then we'd go to a tournament from like 4 to like 9:30. So we would get to In and Out probably around like 10:30, 11 at night, and we would always like just go in there. We would always eat. We would always like do the things we need to do. And it was always just like a super cool experience. And it was like those moments after, whether it was like a really successful tournament where we like won everything, or, a kid ended up crying because he got last place or didn't place at all, right? It's in those moments that really created what I love so much about being a coach on the speech and debate team. Is it's those little moments at an In and Out at ungodly hours, where you can just create just these like little moments, right? And Now, every time I go into an In and Out, I think of when our team used to go there and just celebrate or be together and just like talk through that experience. And there are other like restaurants we used to go to. I'm going to talk about one a little bit later. It's like down the list. I could do this like zone defense type wise, but I'm doing this more like down the list I wrote as I thought about them. So, um, In and Out specifically makes me think of like this group of middle school students at the time that just loved being around each other, was super devoted to like the speech and debate team, and like really worked to make it happen. And every time I go to In and Out, literally every single time I think about it, I think about them and cannot think about In and Out without it. The next one is the song Hello by Adele. So, okay. If you guys don't know, Adele is, if you don't know Adele, crawl out from under your rock, I guess. In my student teaching year, she released her album. I think it was 21 at the time. Yeah, because she just released 30 and then 25. Maybe it was 25. No, it had to have been 25. I don't know what album it's on, but I was obsessed with her. So she released Chasing Pavements, and then ever since Chasing Pavements, I've been like an Adele stan. So she released her new song Hello, and I think this was 25. I think she won Album of the Year for this one. And I remember the music video came out and the song came out, and my next day in creative writing, I looked at the kids and I was like, "Guys, did you hear that Adele dropped a new song?" And they were like, we don't fucking care, Kassick. Like, what are we doing here?" And I was like, "We're in creative writing, so I watched this video last night when it came out, and you're gonna write the story that goes along with this music video. We know what Adele is saying, we know what she's singing about, but I want you to write the story that got them to this moment." So we watched the music video probably like 2 or 3 times, probably more like 10 times, because I was like, guys, it's so good. Like, do you hear what she sounds like? Do you hear this angelic voice? Do you hear the artistry that's happening in front of us? And anyway, played it a bunch, and their whole activity that day was to sign, not sign, to write the story for what happened up into that music video. So every time I hear that song, I'm thought about my creative writing class, just like one bullying me because of my love for Adele, which is just disrespectful, first of all, and then on top of that, just the idea of having that class, my first experience teaching, and just like being excited about it. So every time I hear that song, not only am I like awestruck by Adele's ability to emotionally captivate her audience, but I'm also just taken back to this exact moment in time where I enjoyed teaching. I had that love for it, and I got excited to share that thing with the class. So, Hello by Adele. Can't explain this shit. The next one is is Taco Bell. So this one is more student specific, but and if that student is listening, like they'll know who they are, right? It's just this idea of he was so obsessed with Taco Bell, and I only go to Taco Bell famously. Famously, I only go to Taco Bell when I am like in a really depressive state, right? And there's different kinds of like where your depression ends up, but we don't, this isn't therapy, like we don't have to get into that. So Taco Bell for me is like when I'm really sad after like a long day and I don't want to deal with anything and I just really want to feel like even more awful about myself while also feeling like I'm doing something good. It's a very specific moment where I go to Taco Bell and experience this. But I get two Crunchwrap Supremes, sometimes three, but never one, a Baja Blast, and I sit in my car and I just eat it and I just feel something. So that's the only specific time I go to Taco Bell. At all other times, Taco Bell is not the move. It is not the move. So this kid was like famously obsessed with Taco Bell, and every time he would be like, "Oh my god, like I'm hungry. Let's go to Taco Bell." He was on the yearbook team. Every time I ordered lunch for them, he was like, "Let's go to Taco Bell," and I was like, Absolutely not, absolutely not." So yeah, Taco Bell just makes me think of that kid, and there's like the Taco Bell sign every time I see it, because like there's one person that's like trying to sell a Taco Bell sign, and I don't know why I keep seeing it. It's because I keep clicking on it. The algorithm like feeds itself, and I just think of that kid every time I think of Taco Bell. So that's that. This next one is I think a bit of a longer story. It is literally the entire potato emoji. Every time I see the potato emoji, I think of one very specific student in my career. So I taught this student in my fourth year. It must have been my fourth year because it was right before COVID. And right before COVID, this student was kind of like one that like really latched on to like the classroom, like my experience and like kind of how he needed help with like all these different things. At the time I was doing intervention, and school wasn't super easy for him in a lot of different capacities, and he just needed some help. So I was, he was on my caseload, for example, for my intervention, and he would spend a lot of time in my room. He would spend a lot of time just like seeking assistance in all these different things, like with life, with school, with academics. And he was just like always in my room is basically the gist of that story. And he would always get to school super early. And at the time he was in 7th grade and I was doing yearbook, and yearbook met before school. So before school started, he would like just be sitting basically outside my room, and I was like, "You can't come in here. Like it's a secret environment. Like yearbook is a secret thing. Like you can't be in here. Blah blah blah, blah whatever." And he was like, "Kassick, like I won't tell anyone. Just like I'm so bored. Just like let me come in there and hang out." And I was like, "Bro, like you really can't." So I like stuck to that for like a while, and then eventually it did get to a point where I was like, okay, like I trust you, like come on in, like I don't want you to sit out in the cold. Like it ended up being like that kind of thing where it was like the depths of winter, and homie was sitting out in the cold, and I was like, you don't need to like be out there. So he kind of made a system, and I was like, well, I can't just let anyone in, right? So when he would knock on the door, basically what would happen is like I would open it for him, and then like all of his little buddies would come in too, and then it was just like a whole chaotic mess. So basically like the deal we ended up with, he was like, okay, but like what if it's like just me, like what if I make sure like it's just me that's coming in with like your yearbook kids or whatever. And I was like, great, but like how am I supposed to know it's you knocking on the door? How am I supposed to know it's you that's like doing these things? So he was like, oh my god, I can like text you like the potato emoji, because I don't remember why we decided potatoes, but it was just like it was just like a thing, I guess, I don't know. So from that point forward, basically whenever he felt like he needed something in my room, or like needed to talk to me about something, or needed help with homework, or he was, waiting out in the cold for yearbook in the morning, he would literally just text me like a potato emoji. And then I would know, I'd be like, okay, like, come on in. It's just you. Like, it's great. So that became like the thing for probably to this day, to be honest. And I feel like he would understand like what that meant. And I have been trying to use anonymous pronouns, but I failed on that one. So anyway, the idea with that is like I literally think of this kid every time like the potato emoji comes up, and it's just like that story that like kind of has given that like connection that I still have with that kid. And it's just like it's these little moments, right? And the whole point of this episode is just to say like how much I am impacted and changed by these individuals, and the fact that like they have a place in my story just as much as I have a place in theirs. And I think that's the core of all of this, right? Is it's like sure I'm a teacher, and sure I like care for and take and I, teach these kids and I take care of them and I like do all the things, but they're also impacting me. And in this book, how it started, and it's not really this anymore, but how it started was at the end of every chapter, I would say like, here's what I hope this student learned from me. And then it was at the bottom what I learned from that student. And it's especially moments like this, like having a role in a student's life where you are that trusted person, you are that safe place at a school. Like, of course, how could I not give him the access that he needed, right? Like, so he would send me this potato emoji, and that would be a sign for me that says, okay, he needs something. Like, I'm gonna help him, right? And boundaries get a little bit blurred right there, and I've since worked on that. However, that emoji specifically just reminds me of like this specific moment, and that's the whole point of all of these, right? Like every time I go to Taco Bell, I'm reminded of the impact that a student has had on me. Every time I go to In and Out, I'm reminded of like this beautiful community that I created, right? And that's what teaching is about. And I can't explain that in any other different way other than they are a part of me now, just as I'm a part of them, right? And people don't really get that about teaching. They think it's like, oh, you taught them for a year, like see you later. It's so, it's just so much not that. Okay, the next thing I have on my list is cotton candy machines. This is a very quick story. A student brought in to speech and debate a cotton candy machine, and he spilt sugar all over the floor. And to this day, there's probably still sugar in that classroom. And every time I think of a cotton candy machine, not only do I think of him, I also think of just like the team in general, and the cotton candy machine that I think I still have. To be honest, I moved out of my classroom when I quit a year ago, almost a year. Holy shit, almost a year ago, and it's just sitting in my garage, I think, because I didn't have the heart to throw it away. So, yeah, I have a cotton candy machine. If anyone wants to buy a cotton candy machine, in completely unrelated news, uh, it's priceless. So, I guess I'm not really selling it. Anyway, cotton candy machines. Yeah, every time I see one, I'm like, oh my god, this kid had one. Like, he definitely had one. Um, the next one is also speech and debate related, and what I'm realizing is that a lot of my deeply impactful memories come from speech and debate. So Anyway, I'm gonna do a whole episode on that eventually, probably because, like I've alluded to, it's like the thing I'm most proud of. As I continue, the next one is like the word pet peeves. Okay, so not like pet peeves in general, not like the idea of like having a pet peeve or like being annoyed. It's not that capacity at all. It's solely the word pet peeves, and here's why. There was a student on the speech and debate team who did original oratory. So original oratory is an event where you are allowed to like talk about anything you want as long as you are making an argument. So original oratory is literally like anything that is original, that is a speech that you would like to talk about. And it's a really cool event overall. Like it's one of my favorite events. And like I always say, like if I had ever competed in speech and debate, it would be the one that I would do. And this student was struggling really hard with like coming up with an idea. And we always had like a very specific process to how he came up with ideas. It was like make a list of things you hate, make a list of things you love, make a list of things you wish would change. Okay. And they made those lists. And one of the things on the list was like, I wish people would stop chewing so loud. I wish people would stop talking really loud on their cell phones. I wish people would stop, you know, saying the word sorry when they don't mean it. And eventually they came up with this like speech about pet peeves and like the impact of them and how we understand them and how they work. And they started the speech with like just being annoying. Like they excuse my noises that I'm about to make, but they would start the speech like this, just with like the most disgusting like mouth noises ever to like engage with like what's happening. And this whole speech kind of surrounded the student's success, because after this the student like got really successful in the event, and they eventually went on to win a bunch of first places for this. And then, as they kept writing more speeches, so every time someone says the word pet peeves, I think about that student, that speech, and just like the success overall of like what that meant. And it's just a really cool thing to be able to like have a concrete example of what it looks like, right? So every time someone says pet peeves, it's like immediately my brain goes to like that speech and those moments where we were crafting it. And it's just really cool to like see that kind of thing happen. The next one is something I've already alluded to, but it's sitting on the hallway floors. Every time I find myself sitting on the floor of a hallway, I kind of like am magically captivated by my ability to then immediately go back in time to like almost every student that I've had a hallway conversation with. And like I said, I think this is like a trademark. I got to get this trademarked. Um, but I've had many a conversation with students just sitting on the floor, crisscross applesauce in the hallway, whether it's like serious or not, whether it's silly or not. Then I'm like instantly taken back. And most of the time they're productive. Most of the time students know what they're about. And in my book that I'm writing, I go into like all of those that I've had. Like there've been really intense ones where it's like a student is going through like a really intense life change and they want to talk about it while speech and debate practice is going on. It's always about speech and debate here, apparently. Or a student got in a fight at lunch and I want to talk to them about it. Or, a student's having like a really tough time because of a parent is sick, right? Like I have so many memories of just like, hey, let's go sit in the hallway and talk about it. And even this weekend at a speech and debate tournament, like I literally sat on the stairs in a hallway with some kids, and it was one of those moments again where I'm like, damn, um, it really just is something like magical about like sitting on the floor. I don't know, it really grounds you. I'm so funny. The next one is peanut butter and pickle sandwiches. So this one requires some like lore drop for me. When I was a kid, um, I loved peanut butter. To this very day, I love peanut butter. Will literally eat it straight out of the jar, any kind of form, whatever it needs to be. I will eat peanut butter. Okay. And my mom had a bunch of these like different like little food idiosyncrasies, I would like to say, because she would tell us about like strawberries and brown sugar and sour cream like all together. She would tell us about mac and cheese and hot dogs. She would talk to us about like these big like casseroles that she would make, her like like weird salad that has like marshmallows and strawberries and like basically just Cool Whip and it's just sugar or whatever. Anyway, she had all these like very Midwestern like snacks, and one of them was a peanut butter and pickle sandwich. So I loved these as a kid so much. Like my mom used to make them for me for lunch. She used to like, just have the stuff around and I would make them all the time. And I was telling a bunch of students about this, and there was a moment they were like, "Oh my god, what do you mean? Like that sounds gross." And I was like, "No, bet. Like let me give you one." So I went to the store like that night probably knowing who I was at the time, and I made a couple of them and I brought them to school and I was like, "Hey, like try this. Let me know how it goes." And they loved them so much that they were like, "Cass, like you need to make more. Like you need to make more of these." And I was like, "Okay, bet." So then that night or that weekend or whatever it was, is I bought a whole ass loaf of bread, a big jar of peanut butter, and like 3 jars of pickles, and out of that whole loaf of bread, I made all the sandwiches I could. It was like a sweatshop in my kitchen island at the time. I remember like laying out all the bread, laying out all the peanut butter, laying out all the pickles like in order, and then pushing them into sandwiches, cutting them, and then putting them into individual Ziploc bags for this student and eventually a couple other students at the time. And it just became like this thing. And I did that a couple of times throughout the year where I would, go home and make a bunch of sandwiches for these kids because I also was big on like supplying snacks. And that was like one of the snacks that they always wanted was like, Kassick, can you make peanut butter and pickle sandwiches? And I was like, okay. First of all, it's not that serious. Like you can make them at home. But second, it's just like a really cool thing that I was um, able to do. So I appreciated that. Now every time I think of him, I think of that one night where it was like really late and I was just making dozens of peanut butter and pickle sandwiches. Crazy time for me, honestly. On that same note, there was he was a kid. He was in 8th grade when he came to our school. Maybe he was in 7th grade. But it was part of like my intervention caseload and I kind of made a deal with him at the time that if he did certain things, like my big thing was like contracts with kids at the time, very much like circle time lost at school type stuff that I was talking about in my last episode. But he was talking about, oh my god, I wish they made like gallons of Capri Suns, like just a big gallon of Capri Sun juice. And I was like, I thought they like made those, didn't they? And he's like, no, no, Kassick, like I don't think they do. And I was like, okay, well, I will find one for you if you do blah 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 blah. If you pass this class or if you do this one assignment, right? And he was like, okay, bet, like I'm gonna do it. And I was like, okay, like show me, like prove it. Like what the fuck? Like what do you mean prove it? And when he did, I was like, shit, now I have to go find this thing. So, I remember on multiple occasions I went to a store and I bought probably like because I couldn't find they don't have gallons of Capri Sun, you guys. Like it just doesn't exist. Like it's not a thing apparently, which is like what they should have that. Like imagine just pouring it right out of the bottle. Anyway, I couldn't find any that were like within a price range anyway, even if they did exist somewhere. So I went to the store. I bought like 3 or 4 of just like the boxes. It was Pacific Cooler, obviously, because that's the best flavor. I bought a bunch of those, and for the next like probably hour that I was home, I was cutting off the corners because it was easier. I cut off the corners and I was pouring them into this gallon of like purified water that I had like used elsewhere, right? I bought a big gallon of purified water that I could easily like, disperse among whatever I needed water for and I would fill up that container with Capri Suns. So I sat on the floor of my very first apartment. I remember so this was early on in my teaching career. I remember sitting on the floor in my apartment watching whatever it was on TV, just like cutting Capri Suns. Like I probably looked like a maniac. You know what I mean? Just like cutting open all these Capri Suns to do this one thing for a kid. And I thought about this just the other day because I bought some Capri Suns for some kids and I was like, oh my God, you guys, one time I put all of these into a gallon of things for a gallon container for a kid so that he could have his Capri Sun. And I don't know what behooved me to believe that that was a good use of my time, but here we are. And Capri Suns is definitely something that makes me think about that specific kid and that specific moment because I used a lot of Capri Sun to fill up a couple of gallons. I did that multiple times. So yeah, Capri Suns. Who would have thought? Can't look at those the same after you make a gallon of it. Like it just doesn't ever look the same for you. Um, Second on that list, second, did I just say second? That's insane. Next on the list is Skittles. There's one specific student I've had in my life that was obsessed with Skittles. He was a 7th grader in my class, and every day he would be like, Cassick, do you have candy? I want candy. And I was like, okay, like I got what I have, and if I don't have it, then I ran out. And it became like a thing that if he wants candy, like he'll just ask for it, whatever. He was in my room a lot. He played soccer. Like we were pretty close throughout the years. And up until even last year, he was like, oh my God, who's going to buy me Skittles now? And basically, it just became this like thing that after, like, he would also stay up and clean my room all the time for like after school before soccer practice. Like, he would clean my room a lot and be like, oh my God, just pay me in Skittles. And I was like, okay, bet. Like, if you're going to clean my room and do all these nice things for me, like, holy crap, yeah, like I'll buy you some Skittles. I'll buy you Skittles whenever you want. He graduates next year, I think. What year is it? No, he graduates this year. Oh my God, he graduates this year. And you better believe that I'm going to show up to his graduation party if he invites me, which he will, obviously. I'm going to show up to his house with a big bag of Skittles. I'm going to say, "Congrats, you made it." And every time I see Skittles, I just think of him being a little seventh grader, little high pitched voice, just asking me for candy. So yeah, can't look at Skittles the same. The next one was like a very specific artist, but I don't even think I got her name right. And we don't have to talk about that one because I kind of already talked about it anyway. So the next one is Holiday Inn Express, like the actual building, the actual hotel building. And this one is going to be short because this story itself is like has a whole section in my book like just devoted to it. Um, but the only reason I think about Holiday Inn Express is because every overnight tournament that I've ever had for speech and debate, we always go to the Holiday Inn Express because one, it's consistent as hell. Two, it's cheap. And three, they're always really close to like what I need to do, which is crazy. I've traveled to many different places and it's always a Holiday Inn Express. More specifically, is this is where I spent one of my favorite trips ever with a group of students for the National Speech and Debate Tournament a couple years ago. I took 12 middle schoolers and a high school senior at the time to Phoenix, Arizona for the National Speech and Debate competition. And we stayed at a Holiday Inn Express. This warrants its own story. I'm going to do a whole national speech and debate conversation because I have a whole story in my book devoted to it. Um, because lives were changed in Arizona. If you're listening and you were there, you know. If you weren't there and you're still listening, you know that you just got to understand that like things happened that just like kind of it just like all impacted us. Like there were so many moments there that just like changed us and it changed the trajectory of like a lot of things for us. And maybe I'm hyping it up because I'm like old and I look back on all these things with like so much nostalgia that it hurts. But we stayed at that hotel for a week. And as a teacher and as a person, like one of the coolest experiences that I've ever had. And one of the best things that I've ever been a part of was running and being a part of that trip. So now, whenever I go to a hotel, it's Holiday Inn Express. And I always think about like staying up super late talking to kids like 'cause it's like their first time like being away from home, you know, like talking them through like it's going to be okay, like it's fine, like don't worry about it. And playing I think we played Monopoly, like playing Monopoly on the Nintendo Switch in those hotels, like eating Chick-fil-A in the lobby or waking up super early in our suits and ties like ready to go to a competition. um all of these like going to the pool and just hanging out at the hotel. Those like really early morning conversations, like playing games on our phone, like making tea when they got sick. Like there's just a lot of things that happened. And every time I go to a Holiday Inn Express, like even when I went to New York like a year ago, I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express and I had like their little cups and I made tea and I was like, damn, it literally took me like it literally took me right back. Like it literally took me right back. And like I said, that's a story for another day because I have a lot of really cool just like moments about teaching that relied on that one little trip. The next one is the museum. And I think about the one museum that we used to go to on a trip and I had like the best little group in my like third or fourth year where it was just like this hodgepodge of students, like just a bunch of different kids that were like fighting to be in my group. And I'd love field trips. I love field trips. Like sign me up. You know what I mean? We're going to the museum. Great. We're going to, you know, the mall. Sign me up. We're going to an aquarium. Like sign me up. We're going down the street to the elementary school. Like sign me up. Like I love a field trip. Okay? I love a field trip. And there's something about the museum and this like one particular group. And I think this was the last museum field trip we took because I think the year after that was COVID, not gonna lie. And not only did like couple of students like get lost, but like we finished all the assignments. We were having a great time. We like just like bonded. We watched the movie all together. Like it was just a really cool experience. And it's not even like that one group specifically, but we've been to that museum a handful of times. And every time I think about it or any museum at all, I just think about like those little field trips, because like I said, I am on board with the field trip. Sign me up at any time to do a field trip and I will do it. And the museum really takes me back to like that energy. There's nothing like the energy of a middle school field trip. The teachers out there will get it. If you're listening to this podcast, you'll get it. Field trips are just on top. The next one that I have on this list is kind of silly. So it's the purge siren, and When I started doing circle time, so this was from last week when I talked about circle time, there was a point in my life where I would play like a song to tell students that it was time for circle time, and the kids would get to vote on like which song it was. There's a Post Malone song called Circles that I always used to play for circle time as well. Like that one is also on this list of like I can't think of that song without thinking about circle time. But specifically is the Purge Siren because that song, like terrifying, represents like a horror movie franchise that like you wouldn't expect to be involved in education like in any capacity. And yet every time I think about it, I think of this like community of students that voted for this Purge Siren, specifically like the dubstep remix that I would play every morning at like 7 a.m. that would tell us it's time for circle time. And I would blast that shit. Like I would blast that and it would just like buzz really, really loudly. If you don't know what I'm talking about with the Purge Siren, just real quick, just like Google or go to your Spotify, your Apple Music and just do Purge Siren dubstep. And that's what we would play every morning for circle time. It only worked for that one little class because after that, like no other kids were into it because they were like, "That's scary. Like we don't like that." And I was like, "Okay, well, you guys just don't get it. Like you don't get the vibe." So every time I think about the Purge, or the Purge Siren or any of that, I think about Circle Time and I think about that specific group of students and that on top of like the other songs we used to play. I think Best of Both Worlds was on there, and they also chose the Drake and Josh theme song. Anyway, there's a bunch of songs from that like particular moment that like make me think of um, that specific group of students in that little moment that we had. The last two are again speech and debate related, and then I'm done talking about it or talking about this specific list because that's the end of this episode. I wanted this to be quick because like I'm super tired. I just had class, but I'm also like talking really fast. So excuse me if I'm doing that thing where I just like get really chatty real fast. So anyway, you guys know you've been around, and if you haven't, this is what it's like. So jump on board, please. Anyway, when anyone says at the end of the day, so I have for those of you who are visually watching, hopefully on YouTube, and if you're watching, please subscribe because thank you. That's all. Because thank you. And anyway, if you're watching visually, you can kind of see the tattoo that I'm showing up. So this was a bet that I had with my students. Maybe it's better to like show it this way. Now I feel silly. Um, there was a bet I had with some students on the speech and debate team. It was their first year competing, and they were really into it. I had a bunch of really strong competitors that year, but they were in seventh grade at the time, and they really wanted to go to nationals. And at the time, like it was 2021, 2021, 2022. I think it was 22. And the middle school tournament was still online fully, and they were like, "Okay, let's go." And I was like, "Okay, guys, like we can go. Like it's open tournament, like whatever, let's do it." And they made a bet. And I don't know how the bet came up. I probably had just gotten a tattoo or something because I had a lot more, money and time at that point to like go and do that. So I probably had just gotten a tattoo. They made a bet and they said, "Kassick, if we win one round at this national tournament that we're going to, you have to get a tattoo." And I said, "Okay, deal." Like, and this was early on in the season. And I was like, okay, bet. Like, I'll do it. I don't care. It's just a tattoo. Like, it's fine. I have a bunch of tattoos anyway that, are kind of silly. And they're like, okay, bet. And the whole idea for at the end of the day came up because of we were at an online tournament and these two on this team, we did an online tournament at the school and they were competing against multiple teams that kept using the phrase at the end of the day. So eventually it became this like phrase that one we were laughing at and like kind of making fun of because like so many people were using it. Like they were just saying at the end of the day, judge, like blah 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 blah. At the end of the day, it comes down to at the end of the So eventually it became like kind of a meme of our little team. And eventually they were like, Kassick, that's the tattoo you have to get. Like you have to get that it says at the end of the day. And I was like, okay. And the rest of the design is like a little palm tree with some ocean water and like a sun with like some sunset watercolors. I designed that part because it was like a tattoo design that I like really liked anyway. And it fit with like the quote. So now just like on my wrist forever because of these two 12-year-olds at the time. They ended up winning a round at the tournament and like within 2 or 3 weeks I got the tattoo that says at the end of the day. So it's just like right here on my wrist forever. And not only do I look at this and think of those two students like particularly, but anytime anyone says at the end of the day, I'm like, that's so silly. So the last one is Cherry Coke all by itself. There was a student, he is since graduated, I believe. Yeah, he was like one of the founding members of our like speech and debate team at my old school. And every time I would go to a tournament, all he would all he would eat or drink for the entire day was cherry coke. And anytime I would ask him what he wanted for the team or for the tournament or for snacks or whatever, he's just like cherry coke. That's all I need. It's basically my blood. It was my blood. And I was like, okay, okay. First of all, chill out. Like it's not that serious. But he was so obsessed with cherry coke that I was like, bro, you probably have to do something. You have to probably eat or drink something else. Like maybe some water. And he was like, no, all I need is cherry coke. It fuels me. And I was like, okay, cool. Um, so now every time I see cherry coke, I think of him. But also every time I go to a speech and debate tournament, I have to have cherry coke, and it just like takes me back to that particular kid, that particular moment, those particular things, and that's kind of like the whole journey with all of these, right? Like I have what how many things on that list? I don't even count. And honestly, that's not for here. Like, I don't need to go through and count all of these. What, 15, 16 very specific things that constantly remind me of like students. And this is like when it pops up, right? Like, I just driving down the street, see a Taco Bell, bam. Like, someone sends me a potato emoji, bam. Someone's talking about their pet peeves, like, bam. It's just like these memories and the nostalgia just like really kicks in. And there's something really like beautiful about that. And I think those are the stories that I want to tell is the stories that matter and mean something, because like otherwise what else would be worth it, you know? So anyway, thanks so much for listening. That was a lot of yapping, but it's just me and I'm having a great time. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super proud of you regardless of, what profession you're choosing to be a part of. I don't know where that came from. Anyway, I'm super proud of you. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope to see you in the next one. I really enjoy doing this. And if you enjoy listening, please follow along on all my socials. I am Kassick's Corner at basically everything. KASSICKS Corner at all social medias. So please follow along for more. I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you. Give me a review at the podcast, at any podcast, wherever you watch it. Slide into my DMs. As you know, they're wide open, and I'm wanting to hear some feedback, all those sorts of things. So reach out, and I hope to see you all in the next one.